Captain Emily Carter arrived at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar under the sharp California sun, her boots striking against the tarmac with a steady rhythm that betrayed none of her nerves. She had been transferred quietly, her personnel files stamped with layers of confidentiality that even the base commander hadn't fully been able to access. Officially, she was another pilot joining the squadron. Unofficially, she carried a reputation that was more rumor than record, whispers of missions that had never appeared in the news but lingered in the halls of Pentagon briefings. The base had its own rhythm jets roaring overhead in timed sequences, Marines hustling across the grounds, orders barked and obeyed with sharp precision. This was the Marines' world, steeped in discipline and pride, where reputations were made and broken inside briefing rooms and in the skies above hostile territory. Into this world walked Emily, tall, steady, and unreadable. Her flight suit bore no unusual markings. Her shoulders carried no medals in display, yet she carried herself with a gravity that made heads turn. Most of the men in the squadron had heard her name only once, during a roll call emailed weeks before her arrival. Few had paid attention then. But when she stepped into the squadron's ready room, conversations faltered, eyes flicked her way, and the silence spoke louder than any welcome. A woman combat pilot wasn't unheard of in the Marines, but it was still rare enough to stir curiosity. Some muttered under their breath, wondering if she'd been sent for publicity. Others sized her up with skepticism, veterans who had seen newcomers rise and fall. Colonel James Whitaker watched from across the room. He had been a Marine longer than most of these pilots had been alive. 30 years of service, countless deployments, and a reputation carved in grit and steel made him a figure no one challenged lightly. He had commanded squadrons across 2 wars and carried the scars, physical and invisible, that came with it. Whitaker was not a man easily impressed, nor easily deceived. When he first read Emily Carter's file, something about the gaps unsettled him. Military files rarely left questions unanswered, yet hers was filled with redactions. Operations labeled classified, dates that didn't align, and references to temporary assignments that stretched months long. To a casual reader, it might look like bureaucracy. To Whitaker, it was a puzzle, and puzzles always hid something deeper. That morning, when Emily stepped into the mess hall, he studied her the way a predator studies an unknown rival. She moved like someone who had carried weight heavier than the average Marine. Every gesture, every glance, seemed measured. She didn't scan the room nervously, as most newcomers did, nor did she swagger in seeking approval. She simply arrived. And that, Whitaker knew, was what unsettled the others most. The younger Marines had already started whispering. "She looks too calm," one muttered. "Bet she's never even seen combat." Another scoffed. "You know, they probably sent her here to check a box." Diversity pilot. The words carried just enough volume to draw smirks, but Emily didn't flinch. She carried her tray, sat at an empty table, and ate in silence. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, how Marines tested newcomers, how judgment came fast and respect came slow. But something in him resisted joining their doubt. He had seen too much, survived too long, to dismiss anyone so quickly. Still, he needed answers. A pilot was not defined by their resume. A pilot was defined by their call sign. Call signs in the Marines weren't chosen by the pilots themselves. They were born in the fire of missions, in mistakes that left scars, or in acts of bravery that others couldn't forget. They followed a Marine for life, carrying the weight of stories that could never be erased. Whitaker remembered his own, given during his second deployment when he made a reckless maneuver that saved a squadron, but left his jet riddled with bullet holes. Since then, he had lived with the name Ironhide. It wasn't just tradition. It was identity. So as he watched Emily, he wondered, what was hers? By afternoon, the opportunity came. In the squadron briefing room, after the daily debrief, Whitaker called her out. His voice carried the authority of someone not used to being ignored. "Captain Carter," he said, standing at the front with arms crossed. The chatter ceased. Every head turned toward her. Emily stood, straight-backed and steady, her expression neutral. "Sir," Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "What's your call sign?" The question, though simple, carried weight. Every Marine in the room understood its significance. Call signs weren't just labels, they were history, reputation, proof of where you had been, and who you were when everything was on the line. To ask for one was to demand a pilot reveal the truth of their past. A ripple of amusement passed through the younger Marines. They leaned back, smirking, eager to hear what embarrassing story or mishap had earned her name. Many assumed it would be something trivial, the way call signs sometimes were. Perhaps doll or angel, a mocking jab at her being female. Some even grinned, waiting for her to blush or stammer. But Emily didn't answer. For several long seconds, she stood in silence, her jaw clenched, her eyes steady on Whitaker. The tension thickened, filling the room until even the smirks faded. Silence in the Marines wasn't common. It was unsettling. Call signs were supposed to be worn like badges, painful, proud, or humorous, but never hidden. And yet, here she was, refusing to speak. Whitaker's eyes sharpened. He had seen hesitation before, but not like this. This wasn't embarrassment. This wasn't defiance. This was weight-heavy, deliberate, carried like armor. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but commanding. "Your call sign, Captain." Emily drew in a slow breath. Her hands remained at her sides, but her eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of something: pain, memory, loss. For the first time since her arrival, the facade day cracked, if only for an instant. Around them, the room grew still, the air charged with curiosity. And though Emily hadn't spoken yet, Whitaker felt something in his gut. Whatever name she carried, it wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of name whispered in darkened hallways, the kind that carried stories Marines weren't supposed to tell. When her lips finally parted, the words that came would silence the room forever. Colonel James Whitaker had spent decades shaping Marines into warriors. He believed discipline was not just a rule, but a lifeline. Tradition was not formality, but survival. In the Marines, every detail mattered: how you saluted, how you held your weapon, even the weight behind the name you carried into combat. For pilots, that name was their call sign, and to him, it was the purest truth about a warrior's past. Some Marines earned names through humiliation. A botched landing might forever brand someone's skid. A mistake with weapons could turn a career officer into boomer. Others carried names born from courage or grit, call signs that became whispered legends in bars and briefing rooms. But no matter how they came, every call sign was sacred, a reminder of who you were when life demanded everything. Whitaker sat in his office after the morning briefing, staring at the paperwork on his desk, but not reading a word. His mind kept circling back to Captain Emily Carter. He had asked her once, in front of everyone, and her silence had hung heavier than an unspoken confession. Marines didn't hesitate when asked about their call signs. They carried them like brands, for better or worse. Silence to Whitaker meant only one thing. There was a story buried so deep it could shatter the air if revealed. By mid-afternoon, his patience wore thin. He summoned her again, this time privately. The young lieutenant at the door stiffened when Whitaker barked her name, but within minutes, Emily stood in his office, steady as stone. She saluted sharply. "Captain Carter reporting as ordered, sir." Whitaker gestured toward the chair across from his desk. He didn't tell her to sit, but she did so anyway, carefully, like a soldier who knew not to move too fast. For a moment, he simply studied her. She met his stare without flinching. "You've been here less than 24 hours, he said finally, his voice even. "And already you've managed to stir up this squadron." "I didn't intend to." "Sir," Emily replied, her tone clipped, controlled. "That's exactly the problem," Whitaker countered. "A Marine doesn't need to intend it. Reputation follows you whether you want it or not. And you," he leaned forward, tapping a finger on the desk between them, "carry a reputation I can't trace. That makes me uneasy." Emily's face gave nothing away. She simply sat, hands folded neatly in her lap. Whitaker's voice hardened. "When I asked for your call sign, you stayed silent. That's not how this works. You know it. Every pilot in that room knew it." Her eyes flickered for the briefest moment, as if she wanted to speak, but swallowed the words before they could escape. Whitaker caught it. 30 years in command had trained him to see through silence better than through speech. "You've been redacted half out of your own record," he pressed. "Operations blacked out, locations missing, commendations unlisted. Do you know what that looks like to me?" Emily didn't answer. "It looks like either the Corps is hiding something for you," Whitaker said, his voice low, "or hiding something from you." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Neither sits well with me." The silence between them stretched long. Outside, the faint roar of jets taking off filled the air, a reminder of the world they lived in, loud, relentless, unforgiving. Inside, the tension was quieter but no less dangerous. Finally, Whitaker shifted, his voice sharpening. "You're going to tell me your call sign, Captain? Not because I'm curious. Not because these Marines are whispering. But because I need to know who the hell I'm flying with. I don't care what's redacted on your file. I don't care what some bureaucrat buried under classification. I care about the truth." Emily inhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling with measured control. Her lips pressed together, and for a moment, Whitaker thought she would remain silent again. But then she spoke, her voice softer than he expected. "Do you really want to know, sir?" Whitaker's jaw clenched. "That's not a question you ask a Marine colonel. That's a question you ask a chaplain." Her eyes locked on his, unwavering. "It's not a name you forget once you hear it." For the first time in years, Whitaker felt something stir in his gut, not anger, not suspicion, but something he hadn't felt since Afghanistan. A flicker of unease. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Say it." Emily's gaze didn't break. She didn't blink. She simply let the words fall, steady and sharp. Phantom 7. The air seemed to freeze between them. Whitaker's heart missed a beat. He hadn't heard that name in years, not since the desert skies of Helmand Province. The memory was faint, like a shadow burned into his mind, a whisper in debriefing rooms, a ghost story told between veterans when the whiskey ran deep. Phantom Squadron. 7 pilots sent into hell. 6 never came back. Only one returned, a ghost in the sky, flying a jet that by all accounts should have been shot out of the air. The official reports had buried the mission. Enemy fire, lost communication, aircraft destroyed. Nothing beyond that. But veterans remembered. They remembered the stories told in hushed voices about a single jet that refused to die, a pilot who circled back under fire and pulled Marines out of the teeth of death. A miracle wrapped in silence. And now, across from him, sat Captain Emily Carter, steady and silent, carrying the name he thought belonged to a legend, not a living Marine. Whitaker's hands tightened into fists on the desk. He had asked for the truth. Now he had it. But the truth was heavier than anything he'd expected. Outside, the roar of another jet ripped through the sky. Inside, Colonel James Whitaker Ironhide, veteran of 2 wars, sat frozen, staring at the woman before him, unable to find his voice. Because Phantom 7 was not just a call sign. It was a ghost returned from the dead. The name Phantom 7 hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, and yet the room seemed to draw tighter into silence. Colonel James Whitaker hadn't expected to hear it, not here, not now, and certainly not from the lips of Captain Emily Carter. For a moment, he said nothing. Years of discipline kept his face carved in stone, but inside his chest, his heart thudded like the aftershock of an explosion. Emily sat across from him, steady, unflinching. If she felt the weight of her own words, she didn't show it. Her eyes didn't dart away, didn't flicker with nerves. She simply waited. Whitaker knew the younger pilots had no idea what her words meant. To them, Phantom 7 might as well have been Skipper or Lucky, but to him, an old war dog who had lived. Through missions written off as impossible, the call sign opened. A door to memories he had tried to keep closed. For a long while, he said nothing. He just listened to the faint roar of jets outside, the hum of the air conditioning, the tick of the clock on the wall. But the silence wasn't empty. It was suffocating. Emily finally spoke, her voice even. "Permission to return to duty, sir?" Her attempt to break the silence snapped Whitaker's attention back to her. "No," he said firmly. "Not until I get an answer." "You asked for my call sign," Emily replied. "I gave it to you." "That's not an answer," Whitaker shot back. His eyes narrowed, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. "That's a legend. A ghost story. A name that doesn't belong in this room." Emily didn't flinch. "And yet here I am, sir." Her words were calm, almost too calm, but Whitaker heard what lay beneath them. Defiance, fatigue, and something else burdened. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand across his jaw. "Do you know how many times I heard that call sign in whispered debriefs? Do you know how many Marines swore Phantom 7 wasn't real? That it was a myth commanders invented to give hope to the men who'd lost brothers?" Emily's gaze softened, just slightly, but she didn't answer. "You think I don't know what silence means, Captain?" Whitaker pressed, his voice low, dangerous. "I've seen Marines break down in interrogation rooms, in hospital beds, even in chaplains' offices. I know silence isn't about what you can't say. It's about what you won't say. And you're holding something back." Her jaw tightened. For the first time, her composure showed a crack. Whitaker leaned forward, his elbows pressing against the desk. "I need to know what happened." The weight of his words hung heavy. Emily inhaled deeply. "With respect, sir, you don't need to know." "Not yet, not here." Her refusal stung. Whitaker prided himself on authority. 30 years of service had taught him that his word was rarely questioned. Marines followed orders. Pilots gave answers. And yet this captain, this mysterious transfer with a file full of blacked-out pages, sat in his office and told him no. But what rattled him more than her defiance was the conviction in her voice. She wasn't dodging because she was guilty or because she feared exposure. She was withholding because the truth itself carried danger. Whitaker sat back, the leather of his chair groaning under his weight. He studied her in silence, measuring every flicker in her eyes, every shift in her posture. Emily Carter wasn't afraid of him, wasn't afraid of the Marines outside whispering about her, and she sure as hell wasn't afraid of whatever past she carried. But there was something else, something deeper. "Phantom 7?" he repeated quietly, almost to himself. The name tasted bitter on his tongue. "I remember Afghanistan. Helmand Province. A night raid that went south. 7 aircraft deployed. 6 lost. 1 came back." His eyes met hers. "Was that you?" Emily didn't blink. "If it was, sir, it's classified." That answer only deepened the pit in his stomach. He rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure of memory pressing in. He remembered the reports, the vague lines in official briefings, the way officers avoided questions. Air losses due to enemy fire. Details withheld pending investigation. But behind closed doors, among those who'd survived the desert skies, the whispers were different. They spoke of a lone pilot who disobeyed orders, who turned back into a kill zone after the squadron was decimated, who flew low under fire to pull Marines from a convoy that was minutes from being overrun. The story had never been confirmed. No one ever put a name to the legend. The survivor had vanished, reassigned, redacted. Phantom 7. And now she sat across from him, flesh and blood, staring back without apology. The silence stretched again, but this time Whitaker didn't fill it. He let it settle, let the weight of it crush against the walls, until the hum of the air conditioner felt deafening. He knew he couldn't press further, not now. He wasn't just talking to a Marine. He was talking to a ghost. Finally, Emily rose from her chair, her voice steady. "Sir, if I may speak freely." Whitaker gestured curtly. "Go ahead." "The Corps didn't send me here to tell stories," she said. "They sent me here to serve. Whatever name you think I carry, whatever mission you think I was part of, it doesn't matter. What matters is the squadron. What matters is the mission ahead." Her words were sharp, disciplined. Yet underneath them, Whitaker heard the exhaustion of someone who had carried the weight of silence too long. For the first time, he didn't argue. He simply nodded, his jaw set tight. "Dismissed, Captain." Emily saluted, turned on her heel, and left the office without a sound. When the door closed behind her, Whitaker exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Alone now, he let the memories in. The desert night, the radio chatter turning frantic, the sudden silence as one jet after another went dark. The desperate voices of Marines pinned down, calling for air support that never came. And then, against all odds, a single voice crackling through the static, refusing to yield. Phantom 7. He had thought it was a story. A ghost conjured to keep hope alive. But ghosts didn't walk into his office, wearing captain's bars and staring him down with unflinching eyes. Colonel James Whitaker sat back, his mind heavy. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of doubt pressing against his discipline. Because if Phantom 7 was real, if she was here, then everything he thought he knew about that night in Afghanistan was about to unravel. And the silence surrounding Captain Emily Carter wasn't just heavy. It was dangerous. The squadron briefing room was packed. Rows of pilots sat shoulder to shoulder, flight suits still dusty from training flights. The faint tang of jet fuel clung to the air, mixing with the dry hum of the projector at the front. It was routine. Whitaker always closed the day with a debrief, but tonight there was an edge, a restless curiosity swirling through the room. Because everyone had been talking about her. Captain Emily Carter sat quietly near the back, hands folded on the table, posture perfectly straight. She hadn't spoken much since her arrival, offering little more than clipped salutes and disciplined silence. Yet in less than 2 days, whispers had spread like wildfire. Who was she? Why was her file redacted? Why wouldn't she say her call sign? The Marines leaned forward now, waiting. They had heard Colonel Whitaker was going to press her again, this time in front of everyone. Some grinned, expecting a spectacle. Others frowned, sensing the tension that had been building since yesterday. Colonel James Whitaker stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. His face was carved with lines of experience, his gaze cold and unwavering. When he spoke, his voice cut across the chatter like a blade. "Before we wrap this up, I want something settled." Every Marine went still. Whitaker's eyes locked on Emily. "Captain Carter, stand up." She rose without hesitation, her movements crisp. Her boots scraped softly against the floor as she straightened to attention. Whitaker's stare never left her. "We've been patient. I've asked once already, and I don't repeat myself lightly. Every Marine pilot here has a call sign. Some are embarrassing, some are hard-earned, some are downright ridiculous. But each one carries a story, and each one binds this squadron together. Nobody flies without a name." The room seemed to draw tighter around his words. A couple of pilots smirked, whispering under their breath, already anticipating something they could joke about later. Whitaker stepped closer, his tone sharp. "Your call sign, Captain." "What is it?" The silence stretched. Emily's chest rose as she took a slow, measured breath. Her jaw clenched. Dozens of eyes drilled into her back, waiting. The younger pilots shifted impatiently. To them, it was a simple request. But the veterans, those who had been around long enough to recognize the weight in her pause, sat straighter, their expressions tightening. Emily's lips parted. For a heartbeat, no sound came. Then she spoke. "Phantom 7. The words landed like a thunderclap. A ripple of confusion swept through the younger Marines. Some chuckled under their breath, assuming it was a joke. A few whispered to one another, "What kind of name is that?" But the older veterans froze. Their eyes widened, bodies going rigid as if struck. And Colonel Whitaker Ironhide himself stood perfectly still, his face locked in shock. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. For the first time anyone in the room could remember, the colonel didn't have words. "Phantom 7, Emily repeated, her voice steady, almost defiant now. She held her ground, shoulders square, eyes unyielding. The whispers grew louder among the younger Marines. "Never heard of it. Sounds like a video game handle. What's so special about that?" But then one of the older pilots, a graying major who had flown through Iraq, slowly shook his head, his face pale. "No," he muttered under his breath. "That can't be right." Another veteran stiffened, his gaze snapping toward Emily. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking, Did she just say Phantom 7? The room fell into a hush. Whitaker's throat tightened. He heard the name echoing through his memory, pulling him back to Afghanistan, to a night raid that had gone catastrophically wrong. 7 aircraft deployed. 6 lost, 1 returned. A mission whispered about, but never acknowledged in official reports. A mission most believed had claimed every pilot involved. Phantom Squadron. Phantom 7. Whitaker remembered the radio static, the desperate calls for help, the silence that followed as one by one the aircraft went dark. He remembered the rumors that a lone pilot had turned back into the fire, had flown through impossible odds to pull Marines from a burning convoy. But those were only whispers. No one had ever admitted it. No one had ever confirmed the survivor's name. And now, standing before him, Captain Emily Carter carried it as her own. The colonel's face hardened, though his chest felt tight. He forced his voice out, low and gravelly. "Where did you get that name?" Emily didn't blink. "I didn't get it, sir. I earned it." A sharp murmur cut through the room. The younger Marines looked around in confusion, but the veterans stared, their expressions shifting from disbelief to awe. Whitaker's eyes locked on hers, searching, demanding. That mission. His words trailed off. He couldn't bring himself to say more. Not in front of them. Not here. Emily's gaze never wavered. "Some things, Colonel, don't stay buried forever." Her answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was suffocating, pressing down on every Marine in the room. The younger pilots, still in the dark, sat confused and restless. The older ones sat frozen, realizing the impossible truth standing before them. Finally, Whitaker broke the silence. His voice, usually so firm, faltered with something almost human. "Dismissed." Emily saluted, her movements sharp and precise, then sat down again, her face unreadable. The colonel turned away from the squadron, his eyes fixed on the wall as if it might hold answers he couldn't find in himself. He had demanded the truth, and she had given it to him. But the truth was heavier than anything he had expected. Behind him, the room buzzed with whispers. Phantom 7? What does it mean? Why did the colonel look like that? What aren't they telling us? But no one dared ask Emily. Colonel James Whitaker gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He had seen combat, faced death, buried friends. But this moment shook him more than any firefight. Because sitting in his squadron was a Marine thought lost to history, a ghost who had survived the impossible. And he knew, from this day forward, nothing about his squadron or about Captain Emily Carter would ever be ordinary again. Colonel James Whitaker sat alone in his office, the low hum of the base generator seeping through the walls. The overhead light flickered once, casting shadows across the stacks of files that crowded his desk. But no paper in front of him held his attention. His mind was far away, pulled backward by a name he thought he'd never hear again. Phantom 7. The words had landed like shrapnel, splitting open scars he had spent years burying. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. And instantly, the memory surged. It was Kandahar, Afghanistan, 2009. The night air was thick with dust, the horizon glowing faintly orange from distant fires. Phantom Squadron had been deployed on a classified operation. Their mission was to escort a convoy of Marines through hostile territory and neutralize any insurgent resistance along the way. Simple on paper, deadly in practice. 7 aircraft launched that night, 6 FA-18 Hornets and 1 specially outfitted bird meant for deep reconnaissance. The squadron moved like ghosts, low and fast, navigating treacherous ridgelines under radio silence. Whitaker had been the one giving final clearance before takeoff. He remembered their faces young, confident, eager for action. He remembered their jokes, the handshakes, the bravado masking quiet fear. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes in. Static burst through the comms, followed by frantic voices. The convoy had been ambushed. Insurgents were everywhere, technical trucks, mounted with heavy machine guns, RPGs flashing in the dark. Whitaker had listened from the command tent as the calls came in. Taking heavy fire. We're hit, repeat, we're hit. Eagle 2 going down. And then the worst sound of all, silence. One by one, the aircraft went dark. First Eagle 2, then Ghost 4, then Viper 6. He remembered gripping the edge of the radio console until his knuckles went white, listening as the squadron was torn apart in real time. Only one voice kept cutting through the chaos. "This is Phantom 7. I'm not leaving them." Her voice had been sharp, steady, but underneath it burned a fury he hadn't forgotten. Whitaker had barked through the comms, demanding she retreat, demanding she save herself, but she ignored him. What she did next became the stuff of rumor. Phantom 7 had broken formation and dove straight back into the kill zone. She flew through withering gunfire, strafing insurgent positions so close that the reports claimed her jet's underbelly was scorched by the flames below. When a truck convoy carrying wounded Marines was pinned down, she cut across the valley, unleashing precision strikes that shredded the enemy vehicles. By the time reinforcements arrived, nearly the entire Phantom Squadron was gone. 6 aircraft destroyed. 6 pilots never returned. But the convoy survived, and the Marines inside owed their lives to a single pilot who had refused to abandon them. Phantom 7. The reports had been filed. The mission declassified only in whispers. Officially, the operation was a disaster enemy resistance underestimated. The heroism of the lone survivor was buried beneath the embarrassment of the losses. And Whitaker had believed for years that the pilot Emily Carter had gone down shortly after. Rumors swirled she never made it home, that her jet crashed in the desert after limping away from the firefight. No body, no wreckage, no closure. A ghost story told among veterans, a name muttered in bars late at night. A phantom. The colonel opened his eyes, sweat beading along his hairline. The office was stifling now, but he didn't move. The images clung to him, the flaming horizon, the static-choked radio, the gut-wrenching silence that followed. And now she was here, alive, sitting in his squadron as if nothing had happened. Whitaker pushed away from his desk and stood, pacing. His boots thudded against the floor, each step fueled by a mix of anger and awe. He had demanded her call sign, expecting resistance or indifference, not this. Not a resurrection. He poured himself a cup of black coffee from the pot on the counter, though his hands trembled as he lifted it. He stared into the steaming liquid, his reflection rippling. How the hell did she survive? No file had ever said. No after-action report had explained. The Pentagon had tied the mission up in red tape, stamped classified across the truth, and moved on. Everyone else had accepted the silence. Everyone but him. Now she was in his command. A knock rattled his door. Whitaker turned sharply, setting the mug down. Enter. Major Donovan stepped in, the grizzled pilot whose face had gone pale at the mention of Phantom 7 earlier. His jaw was set, but his eyes betrayed something raw. "Sir," Donovan began, "is it really her?" Whitaker's gaze hardened. "You heard her." Donovan exhaled, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I flew with guys who swore she didn't make it out. They said her bird was trailing smoke, barely holding altitude. They said she went down before dawn." "She didn't," Whitaker said flatly. Donovan hesitated. "Sir, what are we supposed to do with that? If the younger pilots find out what Phantom 7 really means, if they learn who she is, it's going to shake the whole damn squadron." Whitaker clenched his fists at his sides. "They don't need to know." "Not yet." The major frowned. "With respect, sir, they're already asking questions." Whitaker turned toward the window, staring out at the airstrip where jets gleamed under floodlights. "Then we'll keep it contained. Captain Carter earned her place here, same as the rest of them. What she did before, that stays between those who understand what it cost." Donovan studied his CO for a long moment before nodding. "Aye, sir." When he left, Whitaker stood alone again, the silence pressing in. He couldn't stop the images replaying in his mind. The night he thought she died, the voice that had defied him over the combs, the impossible courage that had turned disaster into survival. And now that voice was in his squadron, calm and disciplined, refusing to bow even under his scrutiny. Whitaker knew one thing for certain. Ghosts didn't just return without reason. If Phantom 7 was here, alive, there was more to the story. Something buried. Something dangerous. And he was determined to uncover it. Emily Carter sat on the edge of her bunk, the barracks quiet except for the low hum of air conditioning. She kept her posture rigid, her hands resting lightly on her knees, but inside, her heart churned. She had spoken her call sign aloud for the first time in years. The weight of it lingered on her tongue, bitter and sharp. The room around her was sterile, impersonal, like every military base she had ever lived in. But tonight, it felt like a cage. She knew the whispers had already spread. Phantom 7. Some laughed, some sneered, but others, those who knew, would not take it lightly. She had seen Colonel Whitaker's face when she said it. The shock, the recognition, the questions. And she knew the questions would not stop. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, centering herself. But no amount of discipline could quiet the storm of memories that clawed their way forward. The night had begun like so many others. The squadron lined up on the tarmac, their jets prepped under floodlights. Emily remembered tightening the straps of her flight suit, sliding into the cockpit, and feeling that familiar surge of anticipation. Flying had always been her sanctuary, her escape from everything else. But that night, there was no escape. She remembered the voices of her squadron mates, young, eager, reckless. Some had cracked jokes before takeoff, masking nerves with bravado. Others had been quiet, focused, their eyes hard. She had known them all. Brothers and sisters in arms. Then came the ambush. Her jet had rattled with every burst of gunfire. She remembered banking hard to the left, engines screaming as tracers arced past her canopy. The radio had erupted with chaos shouts, warnings, desperate calls for help. One by one, the voices went silent. She had begged them to hold formation, but panic had torn them apart. The insurgents had planned well, corralling them into a kill zone that left no easy exit. And she had known, in that moment, that they were all going to die. But something inside her had snapped, not with fear, but with defiance. "I'm not leaving them," she had said, steady despite the terror. Even now, she remembered Whitaker's voice, ordering her to disengage, demanding she return to base. He hadn't understood. Couldn't. To abandon the convoy meant death for dozens of Marines. And if the squadron was already lost, then what did she have left to protect except them? So she dove. Her hands moved faster than thought, pushing her aircraft into impossible maneuvers. She flew low enough to feel the heat of explosions rise against her canopy. Her weapons lit up the night, shredding insurgent positions, carving space for the convoy to push forward. Every pass she made pushed her closer to death, and yet she kept going. The last thing she remembered clearly was her jet taking a hit and RPG strike near the tail. Warning lights blazed across her console, smoke filled the cabin, and her ears rang with the sound of tearing metal. But she had stayed in the fight long enough to buy time for reinforcements. And then darkness. Emily opened her eyes, staring at the blank wall in front of her. That was where the official story ended. As far as command knew, her jet had gone down with the rest. 6 aircraft destroyed. 1 more lost in the chaos. The reports buried her with the others. But she hadn't died. Her jet had crashed miles from the firefight, deep in hostile territory. She had ejected at the last second, her chute barely opening before she slammed into the ground. Pain had ripped through her body-broken ribs, a fractured arm, shrapnel embedded in her leg. She had thought she would bleed out alone in the desert. Instead, she had woken up in the hands of strangers. Not insurgents, but local civilians caught in the crossfire. They had pulled her from the wreckage, hidden her from patrols, and tended her wounds with what little they had. For weeks, she lay on a dirt floor, fevered and broken, listening to the distant echo of gunfire. They asked her nothing, demanded nothing. They only kept her alive. By the time she regained enough strength to walk, the world had already decided her fate. She was dead. Phantom 7 was a ghost. It would have been easy to return, to reclaim her name, to tell her story. But when she finally reached a U.S. outpost weeks later, she was met not with relief, but suspicion. Her survival was an inconvenience, a complication in an already disastrous mission. The brass wanted the story buried, not rewritten. So they buried her. Her name was scrubbed from records. Her debrief sealed. Her survival classified as a clerical error. They told her to disappear quietly, to accept reassignment under strict silence. She was alive, but officially she did not exist. And she obeyed. For years. Because she knew the truth. Some wars didn't end with bullets. They ended with paperwork, with silence, with stories erased. Now, sitting alone in her bunk, Emily clenched her fists. She had carried that silence for too long. But when Whitaker had demanded her call sign, something inside her broke. She couldn't hide anymore. She wouldn't. The sound of boots in the hallway snapped her from her thoughts. A knock came at her door. "Captain Carter," a voice called. It was firm, authoritative. Colonel Whitaker. She stood, straightened her uniform, and opened the door. His face was as unreadable as ever, but his eyes burned with questions. "Walk with me," he ordered. They moved through the quiet corridors, past rows of sleeping quarters, and down toward the tarmac. Floodlights lit the parked jets in pale silver, their sleek bodies gleaming against the night. The air smelled of oil and steel. Whitaker stopped, turning to face her. "I want the truth," he said, his voice low but sharp. "All of it. What happened after that night? How the hell are you standing here?" Emily met his stare, her heart pounding. For years, she had kept it locked away. Now, under the weight of his demand, she let the words come. "I survived. Barely. I crashed miles out, was pulled from the wreckage by locals. They saved me. When I finally got back, Command wanted me gone. My survival didn't fit their story, so they erased it. Erased me. I became the ghost they wanted." Whitaker's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. "They told me to disappear," she continued. "So I did. I kept my head down, took whatever assignments they threw me, never spoke of that night again. But it never left me. Not once." The colonel studied her for a long moment, the floodlights casting hard lines across his face. "And now?" he asked. Emily's voice steadied. "Now I'm done being silent." The wind rustled across the tarmac, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel. For the first time since she had spoken her call sign, she felt something uncoil inside her. She wasn't hiding anymore. Whitaker finally nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "Then we'll face what comes next. Together." For a moment, Emily almost allowed herself to believe him. Almost, because she knew the truth better than anyone. When ghosts returned, the living rarely welcomed them. And being Phantom 7 meant her war was far from over. The next morning, the airbase felt different. It wasn't something visible, no alarms blaring, no sudden orders, but an unspoken shift that carried through the hallways and hung over the tarmac. Wherever Captain Emily Carter walked, eyes followed her. Conversations hushed when she passed. The name had spread. At first, it had been a whisper in the briefing room, then a rumor in the mess hall. By sunrise, Phantom 7 was all anyone was talking about. Some said it was just a dramatic call sign, nothing more. Others swore they'd heard veterans muttering like they'd seen a ghost. And in truth, they had. Emily ignored the stares, keeping her stride even, her chin lifted. She'd been a Marine long enough to know how quickly a rumor could swallow a unit whole. But even she could feel the tension pressing in, the questions burning behind every glance. By mid-morning, her flight schedule was mysteriously cleared. A clerk at operations had stammered something about higher orders, avoiding her eyes as he handed over a slip with "standby" scrawled across it. Emily folded the paper neatly and tucked it into her pocket. Standby. She knew what it meant. Someone was watching. Colonel Whitaker felt it too. His office phone had rung 3 times before noon, each call from higher up the chain. The first was from Wing Command, polite but pointed. "Is it true?" The second from the Pentagon, less polite. "We need confirmation on Captain Carter." The third, more cryptic, from someone he didn't recognize, asking only, "Has the Phantom resurfaced?" Whitaker had given the same answer each time. "Captain Carter is a Marine pilot in good standing. That's all I can confirm." But he knew it wouldn't hold. Not for long. By early afternoon, a black government SUV rolled onto the base, dust pluming behind it. Out stepped two men in plain suits, their badges flashing only long enough to silence questions. They didn't smile. They didn't waste time. They went straight to his office. "Colonel Whitaker," the taller one said, voice clipped. "We're here regarding Captain Emily Carter." Whitaker stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back. "She's one of my pilots." "Correction," the other said, laying a file on his desk. "She was presumed KIA in 2009. Yet somehow, she's alive and assigned under your command. Care to explain?" Whitaker kept his face neutral. "Her records speak for themselves." The agent flipped open the file. Pages of redacted reports, blurred photos, casualty lists. And one page marked Phantom Squadron Operation Classified. The taller agent leaned in. "Colonel, this isn't a routine inquiry. Captain Carter's survival was never supposed to see daylight. Someone buried that story for a reason. And now, thanks to you, it's surfacing." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "I didn't bring her here. Command assigned her. I only learned the truth yesterday." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Then you understand why she needs to be contained." Whitaker didn't like the word contained, like she was a hazard, a loose chemical spill. But he said nothing, because arguing with men like this only painted targets. The agents closed the file and left as abruptly as they'd come, their SUV kicking dust as it sped off the lot. But Whitaker knew this wasn't over. They'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't just want answers. They'd want control. Meanwhile, the squadron itself was fracturing. In the mess hall, pilots gathered in clusters, their voices low but sharp. "She called herself Phantom 7, right? That's the name they used for the squadron that got wiped out in Kandahar." "Urban legend," another scoffed. "I've heard vets spin that story a dozen times. One pilot taking on an army? Sounds like a campfire tale." But a grizzled warrant officer shook his head. "It's no story. I was in country that year. Everyone knew about the mission, even if nobody talked about it. 6 jets down. 1 came back. Or so they said." He pointed his fork toward Emily's table across the room. "And if that's her, then we're eating breakfast with a ghost." The younger pilots glanced nervously at Emily, who sat alone, eating in silence, not acknowledging the stares. One finally muttered, "If she really did what they say, what the hell is she doing here? Flying routine sorties with the rest of us?" No one answered. That night, Emily was summoned. She entered Whitaker's office to find him waiting, the blinds drawn tight. His face was as hard as steel, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. He motioned for her to sit. "They came today," he said flatly. Emily didn't ask who. She already knew. "They want answers," Whitaker continued. "And they won't stop until they get them. You know that, right?" Emily folded her hands in her lap. "I've lived with that since Kandahar. The question isn't if they'll come. It's what they'll do when they find out I survived." Whitaker studied her. "Why now? Why break your silence in front of the whole squadron?" She held his gaze. "Because I'm done hiding. I kept quiet for years. Let them erase me. Let them bury the truth. But those men we lost, they deserve more than silence. Their names are forgotten, while mine is locked in a file. That's not justice, Colonel. That's cowardice." Whitaker leaned forward, his voice low. "Justice doesn't come easy in this business. Sometimes the truth costs more than silence." Emily's eyes hardened. "Then I'll pay it." The colonel sat back, exhaling slowly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, almost reluctantly, "If you stand your ground, they'll come after you. They'll dig, twist, Erase again if they can. And they'll come after anyone who stands with you. Emily's voice was steady. I didn't survive to vanish again? 2 days later, orders arrived. Captain Emily Carter was to report to the Pentagon immediately for reassignment and debrief. No explanation. No end date. The paper was folded neatly on Whitaker's desk when he called her in. He slid it across the surface without a word. Emily picked it up, scanned it, and set it down. Her expression didn't waver. So it begins, she murmured. Whitaker's jaw clenched. You don't have to go quietly. Emily gave a small, almost bitter smile. Colonel, I've never gone quietly in my life. That night, as she packed her few belongings into a single duffel, whispers buzzed through the barracks. Some said she was being promoted, others that she was being transferred for special operations. But the veterans exchanged dark looks. They knew better. Phantom 7 had returned from the grave. And the people who wrote obituaries didn't like being proven wrong. The Pentagon's sterile hallways felt colder than any desert she had flown over. Captain Emily Carter walked with measured steps, every tap of her boots echoing like a heartbeat against the marble floor. She had survived Kandahar, survived being erased, and survived whispers that she was a ghost. But here, among men in suits and badges, she felt a new kind of danger, bureaucracy wielded like a weapon. Her escort, a silent agent in plain clothes, led her to a secure briefing room. Inside, 2 officers waited, their faces unreadable. One was a woman, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, sharp-eyed and impatient. The other, a man whose reputation preceded him, was known only as Director Crane. Both carried authority, but their presence radiated expectation. Captain Carter, Crane began, voice low, you are a problem. Not for what you did in Kandahar, you saved lives, but for surviving. Your survival contradicts the story we've maintained for years. Your existence undermines operations, compromises classified missions, and opens us to scrutiny. Emily stood her ground. I saved lives because it was the right thing to do. I didn't survive to be hidden away, sir. Harris interjected, sharp and controlled. You need to understand, Captain, the narrative isn't just paperwork. It's a shield. If Congress or the media learns the truth about Phantom Squadron, there will be outrage. Careers destroyed. Political fallout. Operational secrets exposed. Emily's gaze was steady. I understand. And I accept that consequences will follow. But erasing me and my squadron mates was never justice. It was cowardice. Crane leaned forward, steepling his fingers. You don't get it. You're a ghost, Phantom 7. No one should see you. You exist on paper only. That's how it's supposed to be. You're a tool, nothing more. And now that you're here, the question is, what will you be? Do we let you vanish quietly, or do we let your presence destabilize the system? Emily's jaw tightened. I decide what I am, sir. The room went silent. Harris blinked first, surprised at her defiance. Crane's lips pressed into a thin line. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe a plea. Instead, she offered conviction. You can try to erase me again, she said, but I've lived in a world where erasure was survival. I survived Kandahar. I survived being forgotten. I will not survive being silenced now. I will not disappear. Crane's eyes narrowed. Do you understand the gravity of your words? I do, Emily replied. And I accept it. Harris studied her carefully. Most would crumble under this pressure. They'd comply, disappear, let history forget them. But you carry the weight of the living and the dead. Emily's eyes flickered toward a photo on the wall. Veterans of Phantom Squadron. 6 names blacked out in ink, faces only remembered in whispers. Her voice softened. I carry them. I speak for them, and I won't let their names fade into the shadows. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Crane finally exhaled. Captain Carter, you leave us no choice. Your survival cannot remain a secret forever. The question is, will you serve on our terms, or will you serve on your own? Emily's gaze was unflinching. I serve as a Marine, not as a ghost, not as a file. I serve as someone who keeps her word to the squadron, to those who can't speak for themselves, to the mission. Crane leaned back, weighing the decision. Whitaker's warning echoed in her mind. When ghosts returned, the living rarely welcomed them. And yet she refused to bend. Finally, he spoke. Very well, Captain. You will continue under Colonel Whitaker's command. Officially, your record will remain classified, but unofficially, the squadron will know who you are. You will have the freedom to operate, but understand, every action is under scrutiny. Every movement could be questioned, and any deviation will be noted. Emily nodded, calm and measured. Understood. Harris's eyes softened slightly. You've earned your place, Captain. But remember, the world isn't always as forgiving as Colonel Whitaker. Emily's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Then I will remind it why I survived. Back at the airbase, Whitaker met her as she returned. His usual stern expression was tempered by relief, admiration, and a trace of unease. You made it through the meeting, he said. Emily's gaze was steady. Barely. They wanted a ghost. I showed them a Marine. Whitaker shook his head, the tension in his shoulders finally easing slightly. I thought I'd seen courage before, but you changed what I thought I knew about bravery. Emily glanced at the squadron, where whispers had turned into curious stares. Younger pilots were no longer mocking or confused. They were cautious, intrigued. Some veterans nodded in quiet acknowledgement, as if recognizing a legend reborn. Whitaker stepped closer. The question now is what you do with it. Emily's lips curved, faint but confident. I fly, I protect my Marines, and I keep my word. Phantom 7 isn't a ghost anymore. She's alive. The colonel exhaled, a rare, almost human expression of relief. Then let's make sure they never forget it. As she walked back to her jet, the floodlights glinting off her aircraft, Emily Carter felt the weight of the past finally balance against the promise of the future. She had faced death, erasure, and bureaucracy. She had defied silence and reclaimed her name. And as Phantom 7 climbed into the cockpit, engines roaring to life, she understood fully, legends weren't built in secrecy. They were built in action, in courage, and in the choice to survive, not as a ghost, but as herself. Above the runway, the night sky stretched wide and empty. The stars twinkled like distant witnesses to history. Emily pulled back on the throttle, feeling the raw power of her jet, feeling every vibration through her bones. Colonel Whitaker watched from the tarmac, the roar of the engines vibrating under his feet. He thought back to Kandahar, to the radio chatter, the desperate calls, and the impossible odds. He realized the world had underestimated her once. Not again. And as Phantom 7 lifted into the night, leaving the shadows behind, every Marine watching understood one truth. The ghost had returned, but this time she was in control. The air was alive with possibility, with danger, with promise. And Emily Carter Phantom 7 would navigate it all on her own terms. The legend was alive, and the world would never forget it.